I stood outside the mansion belonging to my son's in-laws, my hand hovering stiffly over a heavy brass door handle, unsure whether to knock or turn it. Through the thick mahogany door, I could clearly hear the voice of my daughter-in-law, Jessica, drifting into the cool evening air. "Do not worry, Mom," she was saying. "Mark's dad is nice enough, just a little simple. Try to be patient with him. He means well. It is just that we come from very different backgrounds. My name is David Mitchell. I am 56 years old. I earn $40,000 each month. Not every year, every single month. The strange part is that my son, Mark, does not know that. And standing there on that porch, I had the feeling that tonight I was about to learn exactly what kind of family my boy had married into. Before I move forward with the story, let me say something quickly. If you are listening right now, please take a moment to like the video and leave a comment telling me where you are watching from and what time it is there. I appreciate that. Alright, back to the story. You might be wondering why a man who earns close to $500,000 every year would pretend to be broke. The answer goes back about 7 years, to when Mark was still attending college. I built my technology consulting company from nothing. At the start, it was just me, a computer, and a lot of long nights. Over time, I began landing contracts with Fortune 500 companies, and eventually even government agencies. The business grew faster than I ever expected. But early on, I learned something important. The moment people realize you have money, they begin to see you differently. My ex-wife's relatives made sure that lesson sank in. The second they caught the scent of success, they started circling me like vultures around fresh meat. Hands stretched out. Sad stories suddenly appearing. People who barely spoke to me before now acting like family was the most important thing in the world. Meanwhile, I kept driving the same 2008 Honda Civic I had owned before my business ever took off. I continued living in the same modest 2-bedroom house. Most of my clothes still came from Target. Whenever Mark came over to visit, I would quietly tuck my Armani suits away in storage and leave the Tesla parked back at my office. What my son saw was a father who worked hard, lived simply, and believed every dollar mattered. He never knew anything about my investment accounts. He never heard about the vacation properties I owned and rented out. And he definitely had no idea that I had already placed $2 million aside for his future. That money was waiting for him, but with one condition. He would only receive it after he proved he could build something meaningful with his own hands. About 3 weeks ago, Mark called me sounding both excited and nervous. Jessica's parents, the Harrington family, had finally agreed to meet me. They lived in Westchester, and according to Mark, they came from what people call old money. Apparently, they were concerned about their daughter marrying beneath her social status. Those were the exact words Mark used. He had no idea how much they stung when I heard them. My boy had been dating Jessica for 3 years. They had been married for 1. During all that time, I had somehow managed to be unavailable for every suggested meeting with her parents. Until now. "Dad, just try to make a good impression. Okay?" Mark told me over the phone. I could hear the worry in his voice. "And maybe, do not bring up the Honda," he added carefully. "If they ask about your work, just say you do consulting. They really do not need the details about your little contracts." Little contracts. If only Mark knew that my so-called little contract from the previous month involved installing cybersecurity systems for a federal government agency. Still, I answered him the same way I always did. "Do not worry about me, son," I said. "I will just be myself." And that was the plan. Well, almost. I intended to be the version of myself that everyone expected to meet. On the morning of the dinner, I stood inside my walk-in closet, slowly running my fingers along 2 very different sections of clothing. On the left side hung designer suits, tailored jackets, and polished Italian leather shoes. On the right side was what I privately called my Mark wardrobe. That section held inexpensive polo shirts from Walmart, khaki pants from Old Navy, and a pair of old loafers I had bought at Payless Shoes before the store shut down. I reached for a particularly awful green polo shirt that practically shouted, "I have no idea how to dress for fancy dinners." Then I paired it with khaki pants that were just a little too short at the ankles. When I looked in the mirror, I nearly laughed out loud. The same face that had appeared on the cover of Tech Entrepreneur Monthly the previous year now looked like every ordinary working-class dad trying far too hard to fit in at a country club. Perfect. The drive to Westchester gave me time to think about why I had kept this little act going for so long. At first, it had everything to do with my ex-wife's family. They were the original reason. When Linda and I divorced 28 years ago, her relatives suddenly remembered I existed. Her cousin needed a loan for what he swore was a guaranteed business success. Her brother insisted I should invest in his restaurant idea, even though the man had absolutely no experience in food service. Her mother even claimed I owed them for supporting me back when I had nothing. Conveniently, they all seemed to forget that those same people used to laugh at my business ambitions. But when it came to Mark, the reason changed. I wanted my son to love me for who I was, not for what I could buy him. I wanted him to build his own ambition instead of riding through life on his father's success. And honestly, the plan worked better than I expected. Mark graduated from college with honors. He found his own job at a marketing firm. And not once did he ask me for money, aside from the occasional dinner when things were tight. He was proud, independent, hardworking, exactly the kind of man I hoped he would become. My phone suddenly rang through the ancient speakers of the Honda Civic. Yes, before you ask, I had Bluetooth installed. I might pretend to be poor, but I am not a masochist. It was Mark. Dad, you are still coming, right? He asked. You are not going to cancel at the last minute again, are you? I am already on my way, son, I said. The GPS says about 20 minutes. Okay, good, he replied. Listen. When you arrive, Jessica's parents are very particular. That word made me smile. Use the side entrance instead of the main door, he continued. And park on the street, not in the circular driveway. Also, Dad, please do not order beer if they offer drinks. They are more of a wine family. I had to bite my tongue to keep from mentioning the $3,000 bottle of Chateau Margaux sitting in my temperature-controlled wine cellar back at home. Got it, I said calmly. Street parking, side entrance, and no beer. And if Jessica's brother Thomas starts talking about investments, Mark added quickly, just nod and smile. He is between ventures right now. Between ventures. That is the polite phrase wealthy families use when someone is unemployed. Over the years, I had met at least 100 men just like Thomas. Silver spoon kids who believed their last name counted as a business plan. And Dad, Mark continued, hesitating for a moment. Jessica's mother, Victoria, she might seem a little cold. It is not personal. She treats everyone that way if they are not from their circle. Their circle. Mark said it like he was already part of it, but I could hear the uncertainty hiding in his voice. The kid was still auditioning, still trying to prove he belonged there. And apparently I was the biggest problem he had. The Harrington estate stretched across 3 acres of carefully maintained perfection. The place looked like something straight out of a magazine. The grass appeared trimmed so evenly it might have been cut with nail scissors. Every hedge stood shaped into sharp geometric lines. The main house, although calling it a house felt like calling the Titanic a small boat, rose 3 stories tall with red brick walls and white columns. Very subtle. I parked my Honda Civic along the street between a landscaping truck and what looked like a catering van. As I walked up the long driveway, I counted at least 6 security cameras watching every angle. The side entrance Mark mentioned led through a garden that probably cost more money than most people spend on their entire homes. Before I could even press the doorbell, the door opened. A man wearing a full butler uniform looked at me with polite confusion. Delivery entrance is around the back, he said, already starting to close the door. I am David, I replied calmly. Mark's father. I am here for dinner. The man's face shifted through several expressions. Confusion, disbelief, and then quiet acceptance, before settling into a carefully neutral look. Of course, he said finally. My apologies, Mr. Mitchell, correct? Please come this way. The butler stepped aside and gestured for me to follow. The entrance hall alone was larger than the entire house I pretended to live in. The floor was polished marble, the kind you only see in museums or government buildings. A massive chandelier hung overhead like something taken straight out of a royal palace. Even the artwork on the walls caught my eye, and I could tell right away it was genuine. One advantage of having money is that after a while you learn to recognize the real thing. The butler guided me down long hallways lined with large family portraits. Every painted face stared down with the calm confidence of people who had never spent a night worrying about rent, a mortgage payment, or whether their bank account would last until the end of the month. Eventually we stepped into what they apparently called the casual dining room. Casual, in their world, meant a table with 16 chairs instead of 30. Mark jumped up from his seat so fast it looked like he had been hit with electricity. "Dad, you made it." He hurried over to greet me, and I could see his eyes quickly scanning my outfit. The expression on his face was trying very hard not to show pure panic. "Everyone, this is my father, David." Harold Harrington slowly rose from his chair, as if standing up required a special effort. He looked exactly the way I imagined he would. Silver hair perfectly styled, skin darkened by years on golf courses, and a handshake that squeezed just a little too firmly, like he was trying to prove something. "David," he said, "we have heard quite a bit about you." The way he said it made it obvious that none of those things had been flattering. Victoria Harrington did not even bother to stand. She simply extended her hand toward me as if she expected me to kneel and kiss a royal ring. "Charmed, I am sure," she said coolly. "You must be exhausted from the drive. Traffic from... Where was it you said you lived again?" "Riverside," I replied, naming my quiet little neighborhood. "How quaint," she answered. She said the word quaint the way most people say contagious. Jessica at least made an effort to smile, although it looked uncomfortable. "It is very nice to finally meet you, Mr. Mitchell," she said. "Mark talks about you all the time." "Does he?" I glanced over at my son. At that moment he seemed deeply interested in studying his water glass. Then there was Thomas, Jessica's brother. He looked to be in his late 20s, slightly overweight, wearing a Harvard Business School shirt as if he wanted to remind everyone exactly where his parents had spent a fortune on tuition. He did not bother standing either. He just lifted one hand in a lazy wave, the kind people give to a waiter across the room. "Tommy just returned from Aspen," Victoria announced proudly. "He has been networking with several fascinating venture capitalists." In other words, he had been skiing on his father's credit card while bothering successful people at the lodge bar. The seating arrangement told me everything I needed to know about this family. Harold sat proudly at the head of the table. Victoria occupied the opposite end. Thomas and Jessica sat beside their mother, while Mark had a chair next to Jessica. As for me, they had added a seat at the corner of the table. Not quite fully included, but not completely excluded either. It was the purgatory chair. "May I offer you something to drink?" Harold asked. "We have an excellent Montrachet breathing at the moment." Before I could even open my mouth, Mark jumped in. "Dad usually drinks beer." "Beer," Victoria repeated, saying the word like it belonged in a foreign language dictionary. "How refreshing. I do not believe we keep any. Perhaps the staff could check the garage." "Water will be fine," I said calmly. I noticed everyone at the table relax just a little. Disaster avoided. The poor man would not be contaminating their precious wine glasses. The first course soon appeared. It was some sort of deconstructed salad that looked like a gardener had accidentally sneezed onto a white plate. Victoria explained proudly that the dish had been prepared by their private chef, who had trained in Paris. I nodded politely while doing the math in my head. 3 leaves of lettuce and a decorative swirl of sauce probably cost more than an average family's grocery bill for an entire week. "So, David," Harold began while carefully slicing a single cherry tomato like a surgeon performing an operation, "Mark tells us you work in consulting." "That is correct," I replied. "How interesting." His voice made it clear he found it anything but interesting. "Small clients, I assume? Local businesses, perhaps?" "Different sizes," I answered, keeping my explanation intentionally vague. Thomas let out a small laugh. "Must be rough in this economy," he said. "All the real money these days is in technology disruption. I am actually developing a revolutionary application that is going to completely change the way people think about thinking." I nearly choked on my water. Change the way people think about thinking. It is pretty complicated, he continued smugly. You probably would not understand the technical side of it. This was coming from a guy who, according to Mark, had failed his freshman programming class. Watching this unfold was more entertaining than cable television. Thomas has always had remarkable vision, Victoria said proudly. He has been developing this concept for almost 3 years now. 3 years developing a concept. In that amount of time, I had built and sold 2 companies. Before this dinner theater continued, let me pause for a moment. If you are enjoying this story so far, please consider subscribing to the channel and pressing the like button. It truly helps me keep sharing stories like this, and I appreciate every bit of support. Now back to the show. Harold quickly guided the conversation back to his favorite subject in the world, himself. I was just telling Thomas, he said confidently, that he really should speak with some of my connections at the club. Real players. Not like all these wannabe entrepreneurs flooding the market these days, Harold added with a smirk. No offense, David. None taken, I replied with a polite smile. I happen to know, by the way, that Harold's company had been bleeding money for the past 2 years. The real issue with people today, Harold continued, clearly enjoying the sound of his own voice, is that they fail to appreciate the importance of pedigree. They think anyone can start a business, earn some money, and suddenly call themselves successful. But breeding matters. Background matters. Exactly, Victoria said, nodding firmly. That is why we were so surprised when Jessica first brought Mark home. No offense, dear, she added quickly, turning toward my son, who seemed to be shrinking deeper into his chair. You have done remarkably well considering your circumstances. His circumstances? I asked gently. Well, you know, Victoria said, waving her hand in a vague little circle. Growing up without certain advantages. It must have been very difficult for you, David, raising a child by yourself on such a modest income. Dad did great, Mark said quietly, but there was something in his voice that stung. Shame. Shame of me. Of course he did, Harold replied with a patronizing nod. And listen, David, if you ever want a bit of financial advice, I would be happy to help you out. He leaned back comfortably in his chair. I know a fellow who is running a fantastic investment opportunity. Guaranteed returns. Very exclusive. Normally the minimum investment is $50,000, but I could probably arrange for you to get in for 10. That is very generous, I said calmly, instantly recognizing the structure of a multi-level marketing pitch. We believe in helping family, Victoria added sweetly. Even extended family. She paused for a moment. Oh, that reminds me. I actually have several bags of Harold's old clothes sitting in the garage. They are in excellent condition, and you appear to be about the same size. Her eyes drifted down toward my green polo shirt like it might be contagious. They could make a lovely upgrade for special occasions. Just then the main course arrived. The piece of lamb on my plate was so small I could have hidden it under a business card. The Harringtons were each poured wine from one bottle, while I noticed my glass was filled from a completely different one. Cheap wine for the cheap guest. You know, David, Thomas said, already well into his 3rd glass of the expensive wine, if you ever want to make serious money, you should really look into mobile applications. That is where the disruption is happening right now. He looked me up and down slowly. Although, he added, you might be a little old to really understand the digital landscape. Thomas revolutionized social media while he was at Harvard, Victoria said proudly. You mean the part where he got suspended for that rate your classmates application? Jessica muttered under her breath. Her mother shot her a sharp look. That whole situation was misunderstood, Thomas said quickly. The administration simply failed to appreciate my vision. Speaking of vision, Harold cut in smoothly, turning toward Mark. You really should consider coming to work with me. He folded his hands like a man offering a life-changing opportunity. There is real potential there. We could get you out of that tiny marketing firm and into an actual business environment. Mark enjoys his job, I said calmly. Harold glanced at me as if I had spoken when I was not supposed to. I am sure he does, he said. But enjoying something and building a future are not always the same thing. Are they, Mark? My son looked back and forth between us, clearly uncomfortable. I mean, the opportunity does sound interesting, he admitted. Of course it does, Victoria said quickly. Harold could teach him so much about success. Real success, she added. As opposed to what? I asked. She laughed softly, the sound light and brittle like glass cracking. Oh, no offense. It is just that there are levels to these things. There is simply getting by, and then there is truly thriving. She gave me a polite smile. I am sure you have done the best you could with the circumstances you had. The condescension in the room was so thick you could have spread it on toast. But what hurt the most was not their attitude toward me. It was Mark's silence. My son, the boy I had raised to stand up for people, to have integrity, sat there quietly while they treated his father like some kind of charity case. More wine? Harold asked the table, carefully avoiding eye contact with me. This one comes from my private collection. 20 years old. When you understand quality, you can really taste the difference. He poured generous glasses for everyone at the table except me. My cheaper bottle remained sitting off to the side. The message was clear. You do not belong here, and we are certainly not wasting the good wine on you. Just then Thomas's phone buzzed. Oh, that must be my advisor, he said, glancing down at the screen. He is helping me pivot my concept toward blockchain technology. That is where the real innovation is happening now. He looked over at Mark with a grin. Hey, Mark, is your dad even online? Does he have email? Everyone at the table turned to look at me, waiting for the caveman to admit he did not understand their modern world. Email, I repeated slowly. I let the word sit there for a moment. Yes, I said calmly. I manage. Before Thomas could follow up with another smug remark, my phone vibrated on the table. Normally I keep it on silent during dinner, but tonight I had made a small exception. The caller identification showed the name Sarah Chun, my executive assistant. Perfect timing. Excuse me, I said as I stood from my chair. I need to take this call. Work emergency? At this hour? Victoria said with a soft sniff. How inconvenient. Although I suppose when you are paid by the hour, you answer whenever they call. I stepped out into the hallway, making sure I stayed close enough that my voice could still be heard from the dining room. Sarah, what is going on? Sarah, who I had briefed earlier that day, performed her role perfectly. She spoke just loudly enough that anyone listening nearby could catch every word. Mr. Mitchell, I apologize for interrupting your dinner, but Microsoft wants to move the contract signing to Monday. They have approved the full $7.3 million. Also, the Department of Defense has finally cleared your security review for the Pentagon project. Tell Microsoft Monday at 10 works for me, I said clearly, and send the Department of Defense confirmation to my secure server. Yes, sir. Also, Forbes magazine called again about that interview request. Should I keep declining? For now, I replied. I prefer to stay under the radar. I ended the call and walked back toward the table. Everyone was staring. Harold's fork hung frozen halfway between his plate and his mouth. Everything okay? Mark asked, clearly confused. Did you just say Microsoft? Just a small client matter, I answered casually as I returned to my lonely corner chair. Now, where were we? Oh, right, I continued. Thomas was explaining blockchain. Thomas blinked several times. Did you say 7 million? 7.3, I corrected calmly. But please go on. I would love to hear more about your application. Changing the way people think about thinking sounds very impressive. The entire table fell silent. Harold slowly placed his fork down with a soft metallic click. Victoria's flawless smile flickered for just a moment. I must have misunderstood, Harold said slowly. It sounded like you mentioned a rather large contract. Oh, it is not particularly large, I replied with a shrug. Pretty mid-sized for us, actually. Then I turned back toward Thomas. So about that blockchain integration, are you building it on Ethereum or planning to create your own protocol? Thomas's mouth opened and closed like a fish pulled out of water. Well, we are still developing the concept. For 3 years? I asked gently. Interesting strategy. Most blockchain startups aim to release a minimum viable product within 6 months. But I am sure they covered that at Harvard Business School. How do you even know about blockchain protocols? Jessica asked, suspicion creeping into her voice. I read, I said simply. Just then my phone buzzed again. This time it was a text message. I made sure the phone screen was facing upward on the table, so the preview notification was clearly visible. The message came from my chief financial officer. Q3 profits confirmed at $4.8 million. Champagne worthy. Victoria leaned forward slightly, pretending not to look too closely. I watched her expression carefully as the numbers registered in her mind. Your phone seems quite busy for a Saturday evening, she said. Her tone had changed now, much more careful. That happens when you work with international clients, I replied. Different time zones. I picked up my phone and slid it into my pocket, but not before another notification briefly flashed across the screen. My investment application. The portfolio value appeared for a moment before disappearing. I knew Victoria had seen it. Her face had gone noticeably pale. Harold cleared his throat. David, he said slowly, when you describe yourself as a consultant, what exactly do you mean by that? Oh, nothing too exciting, I replied. Mostly cybersecurity infrastructure, some artificial intelligence integration, digital transformation work for organizations that are still running outdated legacy systems. I shrugged. Pretty boring stuff, honestly. Boring? Mark let out a nervous laugh. Dad, you never mentioned artificial intelligence or cybersecurity before. I thought you helped small businesses fix their computers. That too, I said. Every client matters, whether it is the neighborhood bakery or a Fortune 500 corporation. Fortune 500? Thomas squeaked. I reached into my wallet slowly, pretending to search for a tissue. As I did, my American Express black card slipped out and landed on the table with a solid metallic clink. Every pair of eyes locked onto it instantly. The Centurion card. The one you cannot apply for. The one you are invited to receive only after spending more than $250,000 every year. Oops, I said casually while picking it up. Harold's face shifted through several shades before settling on a deep purple. Is that? I looked down at the card in my hand as if I had only just noticed it. Oh, this thing, I said lightly. They keep sending me these metal cards. They are a real nuisance at airport security. Victoria's hand trembled slightly as she reached for her wine glass. The good wine, I noticed, not the cheap bottle they had assigned to me earlier. Dad? Mark said slowly, his voice sounding strange. Where did you get that card? Get it? I replied with a small smile. Oh, you do not get these, son. They come to you. I slipped the card back into my wallet. But enough about me, I said calmly. Harold, you were telling me earlier about that investment opportunity. What kind of returns are we talking about? Harold opened his mouth, but for a moment no sound came out. Well, it is a very exclusive opportunity, he finally managed. Perhaps we should discuss the details privately. No need to keep secrets from family, I said with a friendly smile. Although I should mention that I usually do not review opportunities under a few $1 million. The due diligence process is the same whether the investment is $50,000 or $5 million, so it is more efficient to focus on larger deals. Thomas, who clearly could not handle the growing confusion, grabbed his phone. David Mitchell, cybersecurity consultant, he muttered while typing. A second later, his eyes widened. Holy, Dad, look at this. He turned the screen toward Harold. I already knew exactly what he had found. It was the TechCrunch article from last year announcing my company's expansion, complete with a photo of me ringing the bell at the New York Stock Exchange. That is you, Harold said slowly, looking back and forth between the phone and my face like the laws of reality had suddenly stopped working. Oh, that, I said casually. They made such a big fuss about the initial public offering. Honestly, It was a little embarrassing. All those photographers. Initial public offering? Mark jumped to his feet so quickly his chair scraped loudly across the floor. Dad, what initial public offering? Jessica grabbed Thomas's phone and started scrolling through the article. Her expression kept changing with every line she read. It says here your company is valued at... That cannot be right. Valuations are always exaggerated, I said modestly. The real number is probably about 30% lower. 30% lower than 300 million? Thomas shouted. Is that what they are claiming these days? I said with a small shrug. Technology journalists always exaggerate. Victoria had gone completely silent. Her perfect composure was cracking like thin ice under warm sunlight. She kept looking from me to Harold and back again, as if she expected one of us to suddenly laugh and admit this was all a practical joke. Mark slowly sank back down into his chair. Dad, why did you never tell me? Tell you what? I asked gently. That I do all right? You never asked about details, son. You always seemed embarrassed about my little contracts, so I figured I would spare you the boring explanations. Bore me? Mark's voice cracked. Dad, you are literally richer than the Harringtons. Let us not start comparing people, I said calmly, although I did notice Harold flinch slightly when Mark said it. Jessica's phone chimed. She glanced down and gasped. Mom, look at this. She showed the screen to Victoria. It is the Forbes Tech 50 list. He is number 37. That was a strange year, I said casually. They ranked everyone in odd ways. Thomas was still frantically searching on his phone. You own 17 patents, he said breathlessly. You spoke at the World Economic Forum. You even had dinner with Elon Musk. Elon talks a lot during dinner, I said with a shrug. Barely lets anyone else say a word. Harold suddenly stood up so quickly that his chair legs scraped loudly against the floor. David, he said stiffly, I believe there has been some kind of misunderstanding. Oh, I tilted my head slightly. About what exactly? Well, Victoria began then stopped. For the first time that evening, she looked completely lost for words. You assumed I was poor, I said calmly, and you treated me accordingly. The silence that followed felt heavy enough to crush the room. Harold's face turned red. Now see here, he snapped. We were perfectly cordial. You seated me at the corner of the table, I replied evenly. You poured different wine for me. Your wife offered me bags of your old clothes. You suggested my son should feel grateful that you allowed him to marry your daughter despite his circumstances. I paused for a moment. And Thomas here wanted to know if I even had electronic mail. Each point landed harder than the last. Thomas shrank lower in his chair. Victoria's perfectly manicured hand rose slowly to her throat. But the Honda, Jessica said weakly. And the clothes. I like my Honda, I said simply. It is reliable. I glanced down at my green polo shirt. And clothes are just pieces of fabric. They do not define who I am any more than your designer dress defines you. I paused. Although, I added with a small smile, yours probably costs more than most people's monthly rent. Mr. Mitchell, Harold said quickly. His voice sounded completely different now. Nervous. Almost desperate. I think we may have started this evening on the wrong foot. Perhaps we should start again. I would really enjoy hearing more about your business. He forced a polite smile. In fact, I have several ventures that might benefit from an investor of your caliber. There it was. The pivot. The sudden warmth. Dollar signs had appeared in Harold's eyes like something out of a cartoon. That investment opportunity you mentioned earlier, I said calmly. The exclusive one with guaranteed returns. I leaned back slightly in my chair. That sounded an awful lot like a multi-level marketing scheme. I looked directly at him. Are you trying to recruit me into a pyramid scheme, Harold? Harold's face went from bright red to pale white. It is not. It is a legitimate multi-level marketing opportunity, Harold said defensively. So, a pyramid scheme with a nicer name? I replied. Then I turned toward Thomas. And you have been developing this revolutionary application for 3 years without writing a single line of code, correct? Thomas muttered something under his breath that did not form an actual sentence. Here is the part one find interesting, I continued calmly, though my voice carried more weight now. You have this huge house, expensive furniture, designer clothes, and an attitude that suggests you are somehow above everyone else. I paused and looked directly at Harold. But 8 months ago your company filed for Chapter 11 restructuring. You are drowning in debt, are you not? The room went completely still. Harold's face lost all its color, and Victoria gripped her wine glass so tightly I thought the stem might snap in her hand. How did you? Harold started. It is public information, I said quietly. Bankruptcy filings are available for anyone to read. Your house has been mortgaged 3 separate times. Your cars are leased. And I would be willing to bet this dinner was paid for with credit cards that are already maxed out. I looked around the table. Yet here you sit, inside a house built from borrowed money, judging other people because they do not meet your standards. Dad, Mark said softly, please stop. I turned toward him. Stop? The way you stopped them when they were insulting me? When they treated me like I was beneath them? Mark's face fell apart. I did not. You did not defend me even once, I said. Not a single time. You were so desperate to impress them that you allowed them to treat your own father like trash. I shook my head slowly. And for what? To gain approval from people who are living inside a lie. Jessica suddenly stood up, tears filling her eyes. This is cruel, she said. You are being cruel. Cruel, I repeated. Was it cruel when your mother offered me bags of charity clothes? When your father tried to rope me into a scam? When your brother mocked me for possibly not having electronic mail? I paused. Or is it only cruel now that the poor man turned out to be wealthier than everyone at the table? We did not know, Victoria whispered. Exactly, I said. You did not know. And that was the entire point. You showed me exactly who you are when you believed I had nothing to offer you, I continued. You revealed your values, your character, your priorities. And honestly, they are hollow. I stood up slowly and pulled my jacket on. You know what real wealth looks like? I said. It is raising a son who works for everything he earns. A son who never takes money he did not earn. A son who I believed had integrity and kindness. I looked at Mark. But tonight I watched that son choose your approval over his father's dignity. Dad, wait, Mark said, jumping to his feet. I am sorry. I truly am. Please. Your wife's family is bankrupt, Mark, I said calmly. Not only financially, but morally as well. They judge people based on their bank accounts instead of their character. They offered me scraps from their table while their own table is about to be repossessed. I gestured around the room. Is this really the family you want to tie your life to? Harold finally found his voice again, and this time it came out sharp and angry. You came here to humiliate us, he snapped. This entire evening was a setup. No, I replied calmly. I came here to meet my son's new family. I wanted to see the people he had chosen. I looked around the table. You humiliated yourselves. I simply chose not to stop you. To everyone's surprise, Thomas let out a laugh. It was not a happy laugh. Sounded bitter and strangely honest. He is right, Dad, Thomas said. We are pathetic. He leaned back in his chair. We are broke, completely broke, pretending to be rich while judging someone we thought was poor, when he could buy and sell us 10 times over. Thomas, Victoria snapped. What? He said. Mom, it is the truth. We have been acting out this ridiculous charade for years. He glanced toward me. At least he is honest about who he is. I walked toward the door, then stopped and turned back. Harold, I said, that exclusive investment opportunity you mentioned earlier, it is a scam. You are probably already in debt to them. If you can, get out now before you lose the little you still have. How dare you, Harold began. And Thomas, I added, that application idea about thinking. Someone actually launched that 2 years ago. Collapsed within 6 months. He blinked. But if you truly want to learn programming instead of just talking about it, I continued, I know several people who run coding boot camps. Real training. Real skills. Not legacy admissions at Harvard. Then I turned toward Jessica. You seem intelligent, I said. Surely you can see through this illusion. I gestured toward her parents. Do you really want Mark turning into your father? A man drowning in debt while pretending everything is fine? Then I glanced toward Thomas. Or like your brother. Talking endlessly about success without ever actually working for it? Finally, I looked at my son. Mark, I said quietly, I love you. I always will. But tonight you showed me something I did not expect. My money is not the only thing that has been hidden all these years. I paused. You have been hiding too. Hiding who you really are so you can fit into their world. I held his gaze. So the real question is this. Is there approval worth losing yourself? Mark's face was wet with tears. Dad, please, he said. Let me explain. There is nothing to explain, I replied softly. You made your decision the moment you told me to use the side entrance. When you coached me on how to behave. And when you sat quietly while they insulted me. You were embarrassed by me when you thought I was poor, I said quietly. So tell me something, Mark. Are you proud of me now that you know I am wealthy? Because either way, it comes down to the same thing, does it not? The money. I walked toward the door, then paused one final time and turned back. Oh, Victoria, I added. That wine you poured for me earlier, the one you assumed was the cheap bottle. It is actually worth more than the one you served everyone else. She blinked at me in confusion. It is a 2015 Domaine de la Romanicanti, I continued. About $3,000 per bottle. I shrugged slightly. But you would not recognize it. You buy wine based on the price tag, not the knowledge behind it. Just like most of the other choices in your life. Then I stepped out the door. The last sound I heard before it closed behind me was Victoria's wine glass finally smashing against the floor. I sat in my Honda in the driveway for a while without starting the engine. Just breathing. The adrenaline from the confrontation slowly drained away, leaving behind a heavy sadness in its place. Tonight, I had not lost my son to marriage. I had lost him to materialism. The passenger door suddenly opened. Mark climbed into the seat beside me. His eyes were red, and his face looked blotchy like he had been crying. Dad, please, can we talk? I kept my eyes on the windshield. Now you want to talk? I said quietly. Not inside the house in front of them, but out here in private? I know I messed up, he said quickly. I know I failed you tonight, but Dad, I need to understand something. He swallowed hard. Why hide all of this from me? I finally turned and looked at him. My son. The same little boy who used to sit beside me in the garage when he was 8 years old, helping me fix old computers. Back then he thought I was a hero because I could make a broken printer work again. Your mother left when you were 2, I said softly. She left both of us for a man who had more money than I did. She said I would never amount to anything. She said she did not want to raise a child in poverty. Mark's breath caught in his throat. I had never told him the real reason Linda walked away. That night, I continued, when you were crying for your mom and I was holding you in my arms, I made myself a promise. I promised I would prove her wrong. I paused. But more importantly, I promised that I would raise you to value people, not price tags. I wanted you to see worth in character, not in someone's bank account. So when the money finally came, I said, I kept it separate from our lives. I wanted you to love me as your father, not as a wallet. I do love you, Dad, Mark said. Do you? I asked quietly. Or do you love the idea of having a wealthy father now? I studied his face. Would you have allowed them to treat me like that if you had known the truth about my finances? Mark sat there silently for a long time. Finally, he shook his head. No, he admitted. I would not have. And that, I said, is the problem. I looked straight ahead again. You should have defended me no matter what. Yes, he whispered. I should have. We sat there quietly for a full minute. In the rearview mirror, I could still see the Harrington mansion behind us, lights glowing in nearly every window. I imagined chaos inside. People searching the internet for my name, calculating my net worth, realizing just how badly they had misjudged things. What happens now? Mark finally asked. That depends on you, I said. You can walk back inside that house, apologize to them, pretend tonight never happened. You can continue playing their game, keeping up appearances, building debt just to look successful, raising children who believe they are better than everyone else because of their postal code. I turned toward him. Or you can choose something different. Or what? He asked quietly. Or you can choose to be the man I tried to raise you to become. The man who worked hard to earn his degree. The man who built his career without shortcuts. The man who fell in love with Jessica because of who she is, not because of what her family pretends to have. Mark let out a bitter laugh. What they have, he said. Dad, they are broke. Completely broke. I have known that for months. You have. I looked into it before I came here tonight. I know, I said calmly. But their problem is not just financial. They are spiritually broke, morally broke. And if you are not careful, they will turn you into the same thing. Jessica is not like them, Mark said quickly. Is she not? I asked. She sat at that table while they insulted me. She even warned them about me before I arrived. She has been raised to see the world through their lens. I shrugged. The real question is whether she can unlearn that. Just then the front door of the house opened. Jessica stepped outside, backlit by the bright lights inside. She looked lost as she stood there for a moment before walking slowly toward the car. Speaking of which, I said quietly. She reached the passenger side window. Can I talk to both of you? She asked. Her voice sounded fragile. Mark looked at me. I gave a small nod. Jessica walked around the car and climbed into the back seat. Her makeup had run down her cheeks, and her perfect hair was completely out of place. Mr. Mitchell, she said softly, I am ashamed, deeply ashamed, not only of tonight but of everything, of the way I acted, of the way my family raised me. She lowered her eyes. Of the person I have become. It is not about shame, I told her gently. It is about the choices you make from this point forward. What are you going to choose now? I asked. Jessica looked down for a moment before answering quietly. I do not want to become like them. She took a shaky breath. I watched them tonight. The moment they realized you had money, they went from looking down on you to practically begging. It was disgusting. She shook her head. They were disgusting. And honestly, I was disgusting too. You are young, I said gently. Young people make mistakes. That part is normal. What matters is whether you learn from them. Jessica glanced at Mark. Your father just exposed everything I have been avoiding about my family for years, she said softly. They are frauds. All of it. The lifestyle, the pride, the image. It is all built on lies. She wiped her eyes. Our whole life is basically a house of cards. So what do we do now? Mark asked. I turned slightly so I could look at both of them. You start over, I said. You stop chasing approval from people who are not worth impressing. You learn to live within your means. You respect money that is earned honestly instead of pretending borrowed money makes you successful. I paused. And you judge people by how they behave, not by what they own. Mark swallowed. Can you forgive me, Dad? Forgiveness is not really the issue, I told him. The real question is whether you understand what happened tonight. I held his gaze. The man you were embarrassed by inside that house is the same man who built a company from nothing. The same man who raised you alone. The same man who chose to drive an old Honda because a car does not define who you are. Mark nodded slowly. I understand now, he said. I think I finally get it. Me too, Jessica added. She gave a weak smile. My parents are probably inside right now trying to figure out how they can get access to your money. My father is likely preparing some kind of business pitch. My mother is probably practicing her apology speech. She sighed. And Thomas is almost definitely updating his LinkedIn profile, so it mentions we are related. Despite everything, I laughed. Yeah, I said. That sounds about right. I do not want their life, Jessica said firmly. I do not want to become someone drowning in debt while pretending everything is perfect. Then do not, I said simply. It really is that straightforward. Make different choices. Mark reached over and took my hand. Dad, that money you have been hiding all these years, I do not want it. Not now, not later as some inheritance. I want to earn my own way just like you did. I squeezed his hand. That is my boy, I said. That is the son I raised. Mark smiled slightly. But maybe you could teach me. Not give me money. Just teach me how to build something real. And me too, Jessica said quickly from the back seat. I actually have a business degree, she admitted. But I have never used it because my parents always said working was beneath us. I want to work now. I want to build something meaningful. I looked at the two of them. In that moment, they did not look like confident adults from wealthy families. They looked like what they really were. Two young people trying to figure out how the world actually works. For the first time that night, I felt hopeful. All right, I said. But we are doing it my way. They both leaned forward, listening. You start at the bottom, I continued. You learn every part of the business. You fail sometimes and then try again. No shortcuts. No handouts. No nepotism. Deal, they said together. One more thing, I added. Tomorrow we are having Sunday dinner at my real house. The one you have never seen, Mark. Come hungry. And bring clothes you do not mind getting messy. Messy? Mark asked. We are cooking together, I said. Just like we used to when you were a kid. No staff. No pretending. Just family. I would really love that, Jessica said. And this time I could tell she meant it. I started the Honda. As the engine came to life, Mark looked at the dashboard and smiled. Dad, I have to ask, why do you still drive this car? I grinned. Because it reminds me where I came from. Then I glanced at both of them. And more importantly, it reminds me that happiness is not about what you drive. It is about where you are going. And who is riding with you. We drove away from the Harrington estate, leaving their world of appearances and empty status behind. In the rearview mirror, I noticed Harold standing in the doorway, holding his phone to his ear. He was probably already trying to figure out how to reach me about some new investment idea. He would not find my real contact information. That was reserved for people who saw David Mitchell the man, not David Mitchell the bank account. As we reached the main road, Mark spoke again. Dad, I love you. The real you. Honda and all. I know, son, I said quietly. I know. 6 months later, Mark and Jessica launched their own company. A real company. One built on hard work and genuine ideas. They are still building it today. Sometimes they struggle. Sometimes they make mistakes. But they keep learning. They drive used cars and live in a small apartment. And they are happier than they ever were pretending to be rich. As for the Harringtons, Harold's company finally collapsed. The house was gone not long after. The last update I heard was that Thomas had actually started working, really working, at a startup company, starting from scratch at 30 years old. Sometimes you have to hit rock bottom before you figure out which direction leads upward. As for me, I still drive my Honda. I still wear my simple polo shirts. I still live a modest life. Because I learned a long time ago that money does not define who you are. It reveals who you are. And that night, what money revealed about the Harrington family told me everything I needed to know. But more importantly, what it revealed about my son showed me something else. Underneath the confusion and pressure, the real Mark, the boy I raised, was still there. He just needed a reminder. Because a person's worth is not measured in dollars. It is measured in sense. Common sense.